Hey everyone, I'm Mike. I know there's some of you guys out there, you're kind of new to the trade and you're starting to learn how to work on hydronic boilers with zone valves, and you see all the wiring, you got like 5, 6, 7 zone valves and the wiring's like spaghetti. It's crazy, right? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to help you guys understand how it actually works so that you can actually make sense of those wires. And I'm going to try to simplify it as much as I can so the light bulb kind of turns on for you guys. So you can see here, I drew some pictures up. These are all the main components of the low voltage wiring in a boiler system, right? You got your thermostat, you got your boiler shutoff switch, you got a transformer that's usually near that switch, you got the boiler itself, and of course you got the zone valve. Now in that zone valve, these are the internals in here. If you ever get a chance, take one of these apart because it can really help you understand the wiring to a degree. Inside your zone valve, you have a little 24-volt motor, and behind that motor, you got a gear, and on that gear, there's a little lever. So basically how this works is your transformer by the boiler shutoff switch takes 120 volts off that circuit, steps it down to 24 volts, and sends it to that motor. But the thermostat kind of gets in the way, all right? So this transformer and this motor are always trying to send that 24 volts back and forth to each other, but it's got to go through the thermostat first. And the thermostat is like your on-off switch. That's like the light switch that turns it on and turns it off. So when your thermostat's not calling for heat, it's interrupting this circuit between the transformer and the motor. When it is calling for heat, it allows the 24 volts from here to run through the motor, and that motor gets a current. It actually starts to run and it turns that gear. The red wire from your transformer on the load will go to the yellow wire going up into the zone valve, and that's your yellow wire coming up into that little 24-volt motor. Now it goes through the motor, comes back out, and it'll come back out on the other yellow wire to your zone valve. That yellow wire will go up to your thermostat, to the R terminal. Right? Your thermostat decides whether to send that 24 volts or not based on whether it's calling for heat. And when it does, it sends that 24 volts back on a white wire, right? And back to your transformer. So from your transformer up to your 24 volt motor, back out your motor, up to the thermostat, back down the thermostat, and back to your transformer. That's how it's wired up to each one of the zone valves. Now, what makes the zone valves confusing when you have 2 or 3 or 4 of them is that they're kind of all like wired together, they're spliced together, and that can make it confusing, but don't worry about all that stuff right now. Just focus on the one zone valve and how it's connected to the rest. Now, here's the other half of it, all right? There's actually 2 separate 24-volt circuits going on in here. The other circuit is off your boiler, and the boiler has its own transformer. That transformer also gets its voltage off of that same circuit from the boiler switch. It just does it at the boiler. So it takes the 120 here, steps it down to 24, and you have what's called your T&T wires coming out of the boiler. A lot of times it's right in the bottom of the boiler. You just got to run a thermostat wire to it. Usually there are 2 black wires. It doesn't matter how you wire it. You're red, you're white, one the other. It's just a circuit. And basically, these 2 wires go up to this little micro switch up here that's in the zone valve. There's a little kind of button right there, and that's called your end switch. All right. So when your thermostat it calls for heat and allows the transformer to send electricity to the motor and come back, that motor starts to spin, that little lever goes up, it hits a micro switch, and that allows the 24 volts from the boiler's transformer to travel through that T&T wire, come into the micro switch, travel through the micro switch because the gear is pushing that little button up now, and it comes back out the red wire here, back to the boiler. So what I got here is another drawing for you guys that actually shows how the wires would actually be connected when you walk up to the boiler and look at it. So you have here your 120 volts, right, going to your burner switch. You have your transformer near your burner switch. It goes from 120 down to 24, right? The 24 comes off your load, off the transformer, goes to a little blue wire nut, and it connects to one of those yellow wires coming out of the zone valve. And that goes into your motor, which turns your gear. Right? It comes back out that motor on another yellow wire, to another blue wire nut, and your red wire from your thermostat will connect to that and run up to your R terminal on the thermostat. And the thermostat will decide when to turn that circuit on and off based on whether it's calling for heat or not. When it is calling for heat, it'll send that current back down on the W terminal for heating on a white wire, right? So you got your red wire and your white wire coming from your thermostat. Your white wire will come back down near the zone valve somewhere, connect with a blue wire nut to the white wire that's coming from your transformer. And that's your circuit right there. Red wire to one yellow on the zone valve, comes back out the other yellow of the zone valve, up to the red wire to your thermostat, R terminal, calling for heat, W terminal, back out the white, into a wire nut, the other white to the common and the transformer. And that's one 24-volt circuit there. That's how you would actually see it wired if there was only one zone on the boiler system. Now here's your other 24-volt circuit. You got that same 120 volts from your burner switch coming down to your boiler. There's another transformer inside the boiler. Takes it from 120 down to 24 the same way it does up here. And then you got your T&T wires down here on your boiler. Now, a lot of times these T&T wires are not going to be red and white. Sometimes they might both be black. It doesn't really matter because it's not critical for one to be red and one to be white. You could switch them around. It doesn't matter because it's just one little circuit here. It's going to work the same either way. So you'll run your thermostat from your boiler up to your zone valve, and you'll have one red wire, one white wire. So one of your red wires will come off the T, come up, blue wire nut at the zone valve, go into one red wire that goes into the zone valve, and that goes through your end switch when it closes. And then it'll come back out, the other red wire from the zone valve, little wire nut, and the white wire that goes back to your T&T in the boiler. This is the one that really confuses everybody, and this is what makes it all look like spaghetti, is when we actually have two or more zone valves all wired into the system. So basically how it works is the 24 volts off of this transformer is just going to feed into both valves. It's not going to go to one and then you run another wire for the other. It's just going to be a common wire that runs into both one yellow wire on each valve. So the 24 volts is going to come up here, the current's going to come up here into this wire nut, and it's going to flow on both of these wires, one yellow into zone valve 1 and one yellow into zone valve 2. So now this is feeding 24 volts into both of these valves through one wire each, right? And then it's going to come out of the zone valve like normal, up to your red wire, to your thermostat, back down, and it doesn't connect with that yellow, it just jumps over and into a wire nut. And it'll do the same thing here, up to your T-stat, come back down on the common, into the wire nut. So all the commons are going to be wired back together, coming back from each stat. All those wires are going to be spliced together and run back to the transformer. So the more zone valves you put in, the more you're going to see all one yellow wire from each zone valve being connected to this load. Now you can only do that with so many zone valves. Usually a transformer can only handle 4, maybe 5 zone valves, because when you go any further than that, the 24 volts is not going to be 24 volts at all, like 6 or 7 zone valves if they're all calling at the same time. It's not going to have enough to actually operate that motor. So it's limited to about 4, sometimes 5 zone valves per transformer. So if you had more than 5 zones on this thing, if you had like 6, 7, you would actually have to install 2 transformers and then split them to like 3 zones and the other one for like 4 zones. But basically, this is where it gets confusing. It's just one yellow wire off of each zone valve coming off the load, and then all the whites coming back from the thermostats back to your common. All right, so this is our last one. This shows the wiring on the red wires coming out of the zone valves. These are the wires that are going to connect to your T&T at the boiler. So you're going to run your thermostat wire from the boiler up to these zone valves. It's going to be a red and a white wire. Right? And one red wire is going to come off of the T from the boiler, and it's going to connect to each zone valve the same way we saw before with the yellow wires. So your 24 volts is going to be sent to each zone valve through these 2 wires coming together and just tying into that one line. So once that happens, it will come back on the other red wire, both zone valves tied together, and go back to the common at the TNT. So it's basically similar. You'll have, one wire feeding into each zone valve, and then the other wires coming out of the zone valve. So all those tying together and coming back in. And that's pretty much it. I know it's going to be confusing for a lot of you guys. I know it's going to be a struggle to get it, but that's basically what's going on with all that wiring. So if you guys can figure out all the stuff that I showed you today, then you'll be able to walk up to a boiler, look at that big bowl of spaghetti, trace it all out, be able to just cut it all out and rewire it without any issues. So I hope that helps. Thanks for watching.